This is the first of our Fireside Chats for Lent in 2022. This year for Lent, we're working through Max Lucado's In the Grip of Grace. We'd love to have you join us with this book. So if you're interested in getting a copy, let us know at the church. You can put a comment right in here on this YouTube video or contact us at coslongmont.org. We'd be happy to get you a copy. So today we're doing chapters 4 and 5 of In the Grip of Grace. The point that Max is making as he walks us through the book of Romans is that no one is righteous, not on our own. Apart from God, nobody is going to be righteous. But it is a human inclination to try to be, well, at least a little bit righteous. As I was reading these chapters and went through Max's stories, and I love Max, he's a great storyteller. The story that kept coming to my mind is one of my favorite movies, The Princess Bride. I don't know if you remember, there's a scene right near the end. Wesley has been badly hurt, and they bring him to Miracle Max. Billy Crystal is playing Miracle Max. And he's dead, and they're hoping for a miracle to raise him back to life. But Max says, no. He's not completely dead. He's just mostly dead. And if you're only mostly dead, maybe you can still be alive. That's our human inclination, isn't it? To say, I'm not completely dead. But Paul's point in Romans chapters 1, 2, and 3 is to say, nobody's righteous. Nobody's alive. We're all dead. So in these two chapters, he takes aim, using the language of St. Paul, at two of the main ways we try to say, I'm not completely dead. The first is comparison. Particularly, we just find somebody worse than ourselves and we say, well, I might be bad, but I'm not as bad as them. This is the chapter where Max starts off talking about an old neighbor of Judy's and I. We lived a few blocks away from where a guy named Jeffrey Dahmer lived in Milwaukee. Jeffrey was the guy that killed people and ate them, and when they finally arrested him, they found like human heads in his refrigerator, stuff like that. Really grisly guy. But here's the strange part about Jeffrey Dahmer's story. When he was in jail, he came to know Jesus. He became a believer, started going to services, reading religious literature, and according to everybody who followed it, became a believer in Jesus before he died. Max says, it bothers me some that a cannibal and I are the same. And Jesus, of course, told parables about people who said, hey, you're making these other folks, because of grace, equal to those of us who've worked hard all day long. It's not fair. But Jesus said, no, that's the way grace works. There's no point in comparison. Max tells the story said, what if God, instead of grace and law and rules, just said, here's the deal. In order to be saved, in order to get to heaven, you just have to jump and touch the moon. And we started to jump, and the highest human being got 6 feet of the hundreds and thousands of miles. And they looked at somebody who was a little bit less skilled, who only jumped 5 feet 9 inches, and said, well, I'm way better than you. There's no point in comparison. No one's righteous. We don't have to try to prove that we're better than somebody else. We're people of death and resurrection. We're okay with being unrighteous and dead. That's why we put ashes on Ash Wednesday. We understand that dust to dust and ashes to ashes, we're all the same here. Nobody here gets out alive. So we're not going to fall for the comparison game. That's chapter 4. Now, chapter 5 of the book talks about religion, specifically observance of religion and heritage, and kind of the heritage in the sense of, I don't necessarily actually believe it, but it's just part of who I am. Now, Lutherans have been fighting this since the Reformation for 500 years. It's so old, we even say it in Latin. We say we don't believe in religion that works ex opere operato. What that translates out to is, if I show up, I don't actually have to believe, but so long as I do the observance, God's going to have to mark me down as good and save me. Max uses the story of himself as a sailor who's never sailed. He's got the tattoo. He's read a book on sailing. His great-grandfather was a marvelous sailor. And as a result, he says, let's go sailing. And he says, nobody in their right mind is going to get on boat with me. I don't know what I'm doing. I use a different expression. When I teach this, I talk about sometimes people in religion, well, they're like travel agents who've never actually been to any of the places they talk about. They just sort of read the brochure and said, sounds nice, you should go. What we're after in religion isn't just heritage or observance. I mean, don't get me wrong, heritage is fine. I'm happy to be part of a 500-year-old denomination, a 2,000-year-old movement. But I don't put my faith in what happened 2,000 years ago in the sense of somebody believed, therefore I'm still covered. God has no grandchildren. We either believe directly or we don't believe at all. It calls for faith, faith that matches action and all those things that are living and vital. Now, this is one of those chapters where Max points out that he's a great storyteller, but a bad theologian. Because he starts talking about baptism, and he makes the mistake of making baptism about a human being making a pledge to God. And we look at biblically and we understand that baptism is actually God's gift to us. Now, we have to respond in faith. Like I preached a couple of Sundays ago, it's as though there were jewels and gems in the water, the gifts of grace that God gives us. Faith is how we reach into the water and pick those gems out, make them our own. Otherwise, we fall into what the Missouri Synod and Lutherans in general rightly condemn called sacramentalism. That if you just show up and go through the motions without faith at all, well, just going through the motions will save you. Just taking communion, just getting baptized. We understand, and let's face it, folks, if you remember your small catechism from confirmation days, baptism works not when it was done once and forgotten about, kind of like slipped in like an insurance policy, but it's meant to be lived in daily. Daily we live out our baptism when we repent and say, I've sinned, God, yet again, but I trust you're my Father. I trust Jesus. Help me to live differently. Help me to live as a person of faith. That's how baptism is designed to work. So Max points out the problems of religion when religion becomes empty heritage and there's no real point there. He tells the story of having his old letter jacket. And he says, if I suddenly showed up, at an NFL game with my letter jacket on, the coach is not going to look up in the stands and say, oh, thank God you're here. We need you on the field right now. What happened years and years ago, if you haven't lived it, if you haven't walked it, it doesn't work. So there's no point in trying to pretend we're still alive, not fully dead, or like the Princess Bride says, only mostly dead. No, we're fully dead, and we're okay with that because we have a God who raises the dead. I mean, we don't have to try to prove that we're righteous. We simply have to put our faith in Jesus, because when it comes to raising the dead, Jesus is really good at it. He's got experience. That first Easter, God raised him from the dead. And so as a result, we put our faith in him. That's how this whole thing works. We don't have to make ourselves righteous. We trust in the righteousness of Christ. We don't have to pretend that we're not dead, but are just at least a little bit alive or more alive than somebody else. Instead, we just get to say, yep, fully dead, but made fully alive by our faith in Jesus. Well, this coming Sunday, we move to chapter 6, and we pivot from law to grace. It'll be both live at 8:30 and 10:30 and online at this same YouTube channel. And remember, folks, our book is still available. We have copies in the lobby. If you want one sent to you or dropped off, we'd happily do that too. There's also some book discussion groups coming up. They're getting started here, I think, if they haven't already, but there's probably only a chapter or two in. If you're interested in that, once again, coslongmont.org, and people would be happy to spend some time fellowshipping, talking. Some of it's online, some of it's in person. So check us out. Love to hear from you. Don't forget, like the channel. It helps us in all this kind of outreach stuff. Blessings to you. We'll see you Sunday, or you'll hear from me next week at our next Fireside Chat. Blessings.